Hello, I'm Claudia Marshall, and I want to welcome you to our virtual worship service of Buckman Bridge Unitarian Universalist Church, or as we fondly abbreviate it, BBUUC. We are certainly living through some interesting times right now, and during these times, it is especially important to be in community with one another. Unitarian Universalism is a faith denomination that is guided by 7 principles. And Minister Viola Abbott reminds us that these principles do not tell us what we should believe, they tell us how we should be. They tell us how we should act in the larger world and with each other. A great reminder in these trying times. To find out more about Unitarian Universalism or our church, please visit our website, bbууc.org, or you can check out the UUA website at uua.org. I'm so glad that you've chosen to connect with us today. We are posting from our YouTube channel, one of the many ways that we are staying connected during this time of confusion and social distancing. We will continue to offer virtual worship programming until we can safely resume services in our church sanctuary. In addition to worship, we are continuing other opportunities to connect through our Zoom platform, including classes, small group ministries, children's chapel, parent groups, and coffee conversations. Keep an eye on the church website calendar, Facebook page, and your email for more information on various ways we can be connected with one another. Now let us open our minds and our hearts as we worship together. Our chalice lighting will be read this morning by my good friend, Mary McDermott.
Good morning. This is Mary McDermott, and I'm so honored to be a part of the chalice lighting this morning. We light this chalice with deep respect for the mystery and holiness of life, with honor and gratitude for those who have gone before, with love and compassion for those who dwell among us, and with hope and faith for the generation to come. By Reverend Ken Jones.
Hello, and welcome to the Wonder Box. I wonder what could be in our box today. Are you ready to find out? Let's see. It's a turtle. Turtles are so cool. They carry their homes with them everywhere they go. I remember a story written by Janine Grossmeyer about a turtle that changed someone's life. It's called The Turtle and the Voice of God. And it goes like this. Once upon a time, nearly 200 years ago, there lived a boy named Theodore Parker. He lived on a farm in the state of Massachusetts with his mother, his father, and his 10 older brothers and sisters. And in the summer, when Theodore was almost, but not quite 4 years old, it was decided he was old enough to go on walks around the farm with his dad. Theodore proudly walked next to his father, taking extra long strides to keep up. One day, on their walks, his father became preoccupied working with the sheep, and Theodore asked his father if he could go back to the farmhouse on his own. His father looked at him long and hard and said, "Yes, I think you're mature enough to go back on your own." Theodore began walking through the fields, absentmindedly swinging a stick through the tall grass. He stopped to watch the water bubbling along a creek when he noticed a turtle sunning itself on a rock. Have you ever seen a turtle sunning itself? He'd seen other boys use their sticks to strike turtles and other animals. It was part of what children thought was fun, just as some children still today like to bully and hit those who are weaker than themselves. Often children and grown-ups too are copycats, mimicking the behavior of others who seem bigger or stronger than themselves. Young Theodore wanted to be like the other older boys he'd seen, so he raised his stick in the air, taking aim and preparing to knock the turtle into the water. Suddenly he heard, "It is wrong!" boomed in a voice that was strong and clear. Theodore stopped, frozen, with the stick still raised in the air. "Wrong," said the voice once again. Where did that voice come from? Theodore looked all around him. He didn't see his father, he didn't see his mother, and he didn't see any of his brothers and sisters. Then he realized it had come from inside of him. He looked again at the turtle, quiet and peaceful, enjoying the summer day, just as he liked to feel the warmth and the light of the sun himself. Had the turtle ever done him any harm? Was the turtle so different from himself? Slowly, he lowered his stick and he walked home, thinking about what had happened. When he arrived home, his mother was there to greet him, and he excitedly told her about the voice he had heard and how it had scared him. She listened carefully to Theodore, and especially when he related how some strange force inside of him had stopped him from hitting the turtle. "Theodore," she said, "that voice inside you was the voice of conscience. I like to call it the voice of God, and I believe that it's found in the souls of all people. The more you listen, the clearer and clearer it will become. Pay attention to it. It's your moral compass, and it will point you in the right direction. And if you honor it, and you'll never go wrong in this world." Well, Theodore Parker always listened to that voice inside of him, and he grew up to be a Unitarian minister. In fact, one of the greatest leaders our faith has ever known. He became a champion of the defenseless who needed defending. He was a hero in the fight to end slavery in our country. He prayed to Father and Mother God. He fought for women's equality and their right to vote. He felt a sense of kinship with the whole family of creation, people of all sexes and all races who had been made in the image of the holy. And it all started one summer day when he was just a child who saw a turtle and decided to do what was right. Theodore's mother taught her son a valuable lesson that day when she explained the importance of the spiritual practice of self-awareness and listening to that still, small voice that lives within us all. This is how the journey of spiritual practice begins, in listening to ourselves as we begin the search for what is true for ourselves and learning to respect the interdependent web of all existence, our fourth and seventh principles. I wonder, how do you make time and space to really listen to the wonder and awe that lives inside of you? And with this, our story is told. Until next time.
This is the time in our service when we pause to create sacred space in our hearts. We pause to reflect on recent days with joys and sorrows, fears, gratitude, and love. We recall the milestones, the changes in our lives, and those who need our healing thoughts. Our community is deepened by sharing. We light our first candle of joy today for the exciting news from last Sunday's congregational meeting, where we approved the hire of Reverend Amy Moses Lagos as our half-time contract minister. She will begin on September 1st and will be in our virtual pulpit on September 13th. These are exciting times for BBUUC, and we look forward to meeting Reverend Amy and discovering all the creative ways that we can get to know one another in our current virtual world. You'll hear more about Reverend Amy in the coming days and weeks. We light a candle of joy and congratulations to Don D. at his retirement this month. We wish him the very best in this new chapter of his life. We light candles of joy to celebrate this week's birthdays among us. Gabriella S. celebrates her birthday on August 24th. Judah R. has his special day on August 26th. And Abby C. celebrates her birthday on August 26th. Another candle of joy is illuminated in the celebration of David and Vicki H.'s wedding anniversary on August 28th. We light a candle of concern for Karen and Ken C.'s son, John, in Ohio. who was diagnosed with cancer a year ago in June. While chemotherapy is doing miraculous work in many places in his body, the struggle continues with new metastases in the brain. His treatment now includes radiation and possible surgery for a recurring growth. We send our prayers and healing thoughts to John and also to Karen and Ken during this difficult time. We light another candle of concern for Sandra M's daughter, who had breast cancer surgery. She's doing well post-op and is now awaiting radiation. We send our thoughts and prayers for continued healing and successful treatment. We light this final candle for all the joys and concerns which remain unspoken, but which we keep in our hearts. During these difficult times that we are experiencing, we realize just how important it is to journey through this together as a faith community. Let us hold one another in our hearts. Let us be filled with kindness and grace. Let us lift up our hopes and our prayers for one another. Know too that the pastoral care team in your congregation is here for you should you find yourself in need of comfort, help, or a listening, non-judgmental ear.
Hello everyone, my name is David. Our speaker today, Reverend Carmen Emerson, asked that this poem be shared as part of her presentation, and I'm delighted to present it to you. The name of the poem is A Brief for the Defense, and the poet is Jack Gilbert. Sorrow everywhere, slaughter everywhere. If babies are not starving someplace, they are starving somewhere else with flies in their nostrils. But we enjoy our lives because that is what God wants. Otherwise, the mornings before summer dawn would not be made so fine. The Bengal tiger would not be fashioned so miraculously well. The poor women at the fountain are laughing together between the suffering they have known and the awfulness in their future, smiling and laughing while somebody in the village is very sick. There is laughter every day in the terrible streets of Calcutta, and the women laugh in the cages of Bombay. If we deny our happiness, resist our satisfaction, we lessen the importance of their deprivation. We must risk delight. We can do without pleasure, but not delight, not enjoyment. We must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. To make injustice the only measure of our attention is to praise the devil. If the locomotive of the Lord runs us down, we should give thanks that the end had magnitude. We must admit there will be music despite everything. We stand at the prow again of a small ship anchored late at night in the tiny port looking over to the sleeping island. The waterfront is 3 shuttered cafes and 1 naked light burning. To hear the faint sound of oars in the silence as a rowboat comes slowly out and goes back again is truly worth all the years of sorrow that are to come. Poet Jack Gilbert.
Our virtual plate offering today and throughout the month of August will go to BBUUC's own efforts in partnering with UU the Vote, a non-partisan faith initiative to engage our neighbors and educate our communities, mobilize voters, and rally around key ballot initiatives. This month's contributions will go towards supplies and postage to sustain BBUUC's postcard and letter mailing programs until the end of October, right here in our own community. This is a grassroots campaign that relies on grassroots support. To make an offering, simply go to the link on our PayPal Giving Fund on our YouTube channel and give any amount, whatever you are able to share. Your contributions are most appreciated. Today's reflection by our affiliated community minister, Reverend Carmen Emerson, is inspired by her colleague, the Reverend Dr. Kendall Gibbons. As Carmen shares, considering Reverend Gibbons' insights about the 12 gifts of spiritual maturity has become a spiritual practice I apply daily in my personal and professional relationships, and as I live most faithfully as a humanist, you. The community of love and justice may be built initially by raw enthusiasm, but it can only be sustained over the long term by the aspiration towards spiritual maturity. The greatest souls of all ages have testified that this is a process that never ends. We can always go deeper, learn more, become able to see ourselves and the world more clearly. The Reverend Dr. Kendall Gibbons.
Good morning, I'm Reverend Carmen Emerson. I'm a member of Buckman Bridge Unitarian Universalist Church, and I also serve as your affiliated community minister, which means my ministry is out in the larger community. Currently, that means that I serve as a chaplain resident at Baptist Medical Center downtown. I work with the palliative care team, and I am about to begin my second year of residency with the hospital. I'm glad to be with you this morning. We are living in a time of transition, and so I'm wondering, how are you doing? How are you doing? Truthfully, I spend more moments than I care to admit experiencing sadness, helplessness, and even hopelessness. Part of this is influenced by my work at the hospital as I experience the ways we now engage with the living as we care for the dying. I was talking to the husband of a patient this afternoon, a COVID patient, and he said, it's not natural what we're doing now, and I agree, it's not natural. From the housekeepers to the physician specialists, compassion and knowledge are present in everything we do. People are doing their best. Their best is astounding, and it is inspiring. Simultaneously, there is this truth. The ways that we've cared for our sick and our dying and our grieving for generations of humanity are impacted by the realities of COVID-19. We can never get as close as we want to in offering our tender, loving care to patients, families, and staff. There is, of course, the necessary PPE, that personal protective equipment between me and thee, essential for all of us who choose to respect life and to live with loving kindness towards stranger and friend. But as the husband of that patient said earlier today, it's not natural not to be beside the person you love while they're dying, holding their hand, kissing their face, whispering the love stories in their ears to help them transition. The pandemic hit us when we were already down and divided, enduring more than the usual chaos of politics, as well as the necessary intensity of revolution as more and more people and more white people began their work of becoming anti-racist and demand, among other things, criminal justice reform. So again, I ask you, how are you? Do you ever have that feeling of being worn out at soul level? I think of Rebecca Solnit's great line in her book, Hope in the Dark, when she speaks about dwelling on adversity and doom in ways that make some people develop, quote, the souls of dog catchers and meter maids. Meaning no offense to dog catchers or meter maids, but even as helpless, angry, and despairing as the daily news can make me, I do not want to live with the heart and soul focused on judgment and retribution. Rather, I want to live with a heart, a soul, and a mind, of course, engaged in justice and peacemaking, engaged in the work of hope. I think about hope a lot. I used to say that my ministry was grounded in a theology of hope, meaning that I was certain in the end that everything would work out for the good if we all worked together toward that good. It was a naive theology, precedented on the myth that everyone agrees on what the collective good is. And my understanding of that, of the collective good, was precedented on the liberal value of that perfect freedom found at the intersection of autonomy and community, and the certainty that everyone surely must desire that freedom for everyone else. Nope. Such freedom is not desired for everyone by everyone, and my theology of hope got a reality check. Somehow I had conflated hope with optimism, and they're not the same. Optimism tells a preordained narrative, writes my colleague, the Reverend Nancy McDonald Ladd. She continues, it is an assertion that the scales have already been tipped toward triumph. Hope is different than optimism, says Nancy. Like faith, hope is the exact opposite of certainty. It does not presume an outcome for good or for ill. It lies in the waiting moment when the tug from both directions is not yet fully resolved and when a great many things are still possible. Hope moves in the humble spaces that open when we allow ourselves to be uncertain. I think that's a really important line. I want to say it again. Hope moves in the humble spaces that open when we allow ourselves to be uncertain. Nancy echoes the wisdom of Rebecca Solnit, who writes, hope locates itself in the premise that we don't know what will happen. And in that spaciousness of uncertainty, there is room to act. In the spaciousness of uncertainty, there is room to act. So I'll share a personal truth here. I don't like uncertainty, and I've counted on skill, experience, and intellect, and at times just sheer force of will to help me avoid uncertainty as often as possible. And now let me say that a different way. I've taken so much for granted, including control and choices, and my actions have often been grounded in the certainty that I would be all right. What a privileged person I have been. Here's another truth I need to share. I don't want to be someone who takes anything for granted, who moves through life presumptive, careless, privileged, and certain all the time. I do want to move through life hopeful, and hopeful in the way that is described by both Nancy and Solnit, at home perhaps joyful even, in the humble spaciousness of uncertainty. The humble spaciousness of uncertainty. Such spaciousness could feel overwhelming. The image that comes to my mind is freely floating through space, my very thin, paper-thin spacesuit, my man-made brittle helmet, and that thin tether, the only thing keeping me safe as I explore the vastness, and all of those safety measures seeming so fragile. Kind of like certainty itself is fragile, I guess. In the spaciousness of uncertainty, I need something to strengthen my resolve, to prepare my mind, my heart, and my soul to live with hope and faith. In the spaciousness of uncertainty, I need a hopeful faith rooted in the belief that what we do matters, though how and when it may matter, who and what it may impact, are not things we can know beforehand. What we do matters, even though how and when it may matter, who and what it may impact, are not things we can know beforehand. Another great insight from Rebecca Solnit, and I think it's something we struggle with as Unitarian Universalists. To further develop the hopeful faith that I want to live as a religious humanist Unitarian Universalist, I've been engaged in a spiritual practice of studying the 12 characteristics of spiritual maturity named by my colleague, the Reverend Dr. Kendall Gibbons. Kendall is also a humanist UU, And she presented her ideas about spiritual maturity in a keynote address offered to the UUA Mountain District Assembly in October 2017. Her keynote address is titled, quote, "On Becoming a Grown-Up, Spiritual Maturity with and Without God," and you can find it online. I commend it to you. I'm so grateful to Kendall for her ideas and the way she really offered depth of thought around those ideas, and I found it very meaningful to use them as landmarks as I navigate this vast spaciousness of uncertainty. I want to name those 12 characteristics of spiritual maturity for you, and then focus briefly on the two that I'm finding especially helpful right now. So according to Kendall, the 12 characteristics of spiritual maturity are self-awareness, reverence, being real, being strong, being compassionate, being graceful, being humble, being loyal, being faithful, being interdependent, being at peace with our own mortality, and finally, being fluent in the language of the Spirit, meaning that we recognize the symbolic power of language to help us make meaning of our empirical knowledge and our experiences. While I would love to engage in an in-depth reflection on each one of these 12 characteristics of spiritual maturity, I want to focus on the two again that I'm finding especially helpful right now as I try to live and move and have my being, hopefully, in the spaciousness of uncertainty. So the first characteristic of spiritual maturity that I'm working with is self-awareness, and specifically self-awareness in the service of my intentions. I want to be clear, when I use the word intention, I mean it in a very down-to-earth way, a very down-to-earth UU religious humanist kind of way, as in my intention is to be a good person who respects the inherent worth and dignity of others, who enjoys my wild and precious life, who treasures my relationship with family and friends, who is a compassionate presence to those I serve as a chaplain, and who contributes to justice and peacemaking in our world. Sometimes these intentions will rub against each other, and self-awareness is about being honest with myself, about that interplay between my intentions and my impulses, my desires, my actions, but also what it means to live with the consequences of my actions. The interplay of all those things becomes what Kendall calls our object of reflection, the object of a reflection by a person seeking spiritual maturity, a person of integrity who becomes boundaried and responsible rather than presumptive or careless. An example for you. In the current pandemic, my intention is also to be safe because my desire is to live a long and healthy life and to keep those I love safe too, so that they also can live long and healthy lives. I don't want to be a contagious person, and I don't want to catch the virus from a contagious person. Therefore, I choose to wear a mask, an action reflecting my intentions. And I desperately wish that others would also wear masks. That's my desire. I'm angry when they do not wear a mask. That's a reaction. And I think unkind, accusatory, judgmental thoughts about them. That's also a reaction. The scaredest, most frightened part of me, the part of me that wants to rely on the certainty that if people will just wear a mask, then everyone will be fine. That scared part of me, that certain part of me, wants to stomp my foot and yell at people not to be stupid or selfish. Yet another reaction. In fact, I've practically done that, and you know what? It felt like spewing poison. The consequence of those actions was feeling like I had betrayed my values and my integrity. If everyone's mad at everyone else because of what we are doing or not doing, we are reactively self-destructing and imploding. A commitment to self-awareness requires me to be more reflective than reactive. What is my intention these days? To be righteously destructive or to be humbly creative? There is a way to convey concern about the absence of masks without being judgmental. It takes some soul searching, some reflection to know how to do that in a boundaried and responsible way as I live true to my intentions, my values, and my desires, and simultaneously learn to live with the uncertainty of what is yet to come as we navigate this pandemic. How do I convey my belief in the inherent worth and dignity of every person, even the one not wearing a mask? It requires self-reflection at the deepest levels of my being. I may not change the other person's mind, but if I behave in ways that betray my own values, I damage my own heart and soul. Being self-aware in service to my intentions and being reflective about those things helps guide my words, my deeds, and my choices as I make my way through the humble spaciousness of uncertainty, where hope is to be found and tended. The second characteristic of spiritual maturity that I'm focused on these days is strength, and specifically the strength to accept the complexities and ambiguities of life with the understanding that, as Kendall writes, our capacity to contain joy is also the extent of the sorrow we are able to feel. This is really important, so I want to say it again. Our capacities for joy and sorrow are interconnected. To the extent we can experience great joys, we are able to experience deep sorrows. To the extent we are able to experience deep sorrows, we are able to experience deep joys. There's a reason we do this every Sunday in tandem. We never have only joys or only sorrows, or at least we don't bookmark this space for only one or the other. We introduce this time in our worship service every Sunday as a time to consider the joys and sorrows of those we care about. I have a confession this morning. I believe myself to be a compassionate person, but I am suspicious of joy, of my deservedness of joy. In my family of origin, a strong worth ethic occupies the place of primacy. When all the work is done, then it's time to have fun and enjoy things. Can you spot the problem with this approach? The work is never done. But if I understand the insight offered by Kendall, deepening my capacity for joy will also deepen my capacity for compassion, which is my work, and God knows we need more compassion these days. Recall these lines from this morning's meditation by Jack Gilbert. If we deny our happiness, resist our satisfaction, we lessen the importance of deprivation. We can do without pleasure, but not delight, not enjoyment. We must have the stubbornness to accept the gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. We must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. To make injustice the only measure of our intention is to praise the devil. So this too is a spiritual practice for a person seeking spiritual maturity, strengthening my capacity for complexities and ambiguities, for joys and sorrows, strengthening my capacity for delight and compassion. The poet Terry Darracott says it plain and true, joy is an act of resistance. And when I add those words to a two-word mantra inspired by Gilbert's poem, the mantra sometimes I think of as stubborn gladness, stubborn gladness. When I think of what Darracott says and what Gilbert say together, joy is an act of resistance, stubborn gladness, that is a mantra that really helps me. I'm reminded that although the work of compassion will never be done, we are also still deserving of joy, of offering it, of receiving it, of witnessing it, that we may live more faithfully in the humble spaciousness of uncertainty, where hope is to be found and tended. That piece of spiritual maturity is necessary in that space as well. I remind you again of the words of Nancy MacDonald Ladd and Rebecca Solnit that I shared earlier in this sermon. Hope moves in the humble spaces that open when we allow ourselves to be uncertain. Hope locates itself in the premise that we don't know what will happen, and that in the spaciousness of uncertainty, there is room to act. Hope locates itself in the premise that we don't know what will happen, and that in the spaciousness of uncertainty, there is room to act. The blessing of being part of a faith community like Buckman Bridge is that we are likely to find a willing partner to work with us in developing our own spiritual maturity as Unitarian Universalists, braving together the humble spaciousness of uncertainty, where hope is to be found and tended. May it be so, and may we be so. Amen.
Blessed Spirit of my life, give me strength through stress and strife. Help me live with dignity. Let me know serenity. Fill me with a vision. Clear my mind of fear and confusion. When my thoughts flow restlessly, let peace find a home in me. Spirit of great mystery, hear the still small voice in me. Help me live my wordless creed as I comfort those in need. Fill me with compassion, be the source of my intuition. Then when life is done for me, let love be my legacy.
We extinguish this chalice here, that it might glow gently in our hearts. May it light your path as you leave this place. May it guide your way until we are together again. Thank you for being with us today. Shalom, namaste, blessed be.